In the bustling city, where the noise of honking cars filled the air and people rushed to get to their destinations, there was a young woman named Jane. She was a hawker who sold fresh fruits along the side of the road. Every morning, Jane woke up early, carefully arranging her bananas, oranges, and apples on a small wooden cart. Despite the heat and the dust, she worked hard, always smiling at the passers-by, trying to make a living. She believed in the power of hard work, and she didn't mind the long hours. To her, honesty and perseverance were the only ways to build a future. She knew that one day, her efforts would pay off. But Jane's friends, who lived a different life, often laughed at her. They didn't understand why she worked so hard. To them, the easy way to success was through shortcuts, finding wealthy men who could buy them expensive gifts and take care of their needs. They often mocked Jane, calling her naive for not seeing that money and status were what mattered most. "Why struggle when you can have it all in an instant?" they would say, flaunting their new clothes and accessories. Jane would just smile and shake her head, her heart not swayed by their words. She was content, knowing her integrity would lead her to something greater. Despite their mocking, Jane remained focused on her goals. She didn't allow the negativity of her friends to break her spirit. She had always believed that good things came to those who worked hard, and she trusted that life would reward her for her honesty and dedication. Little did she know that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her persistence caught the eye of someone who would see her worth, someone who would soon prove that hard work truly pays off, even when the world around you seems to offer a different path. One afternoon, as Jane was setting up her fruit stand, a well-dressed man walked past her stall. He was tall, handsome, and exuded an air of confidence that caught Jane's attention. Unlike the many others who hurried by without a second glance, this man stopped and smiled at her. His name was David, a successful businessman who had built a name for himself in the city. He admired the way Jane carried herself with such grace and humility, selling fruit on the street, while others her age might have been lounging in comfort. Something about her struck him deeply. Her honest nature, her hard-working spirit, and the way she carried her burdens without complaining. David started buying fruit from Jane every day. At first, it was just small talk, questions about the weather, the fruit she sold, and what motivated her to work so hard. Over time, their conversations grew longer. Jane was careful to remain humble and not let the attention go to her head, though she couldn't help but feel a flutter in her heart whenever David visited. He made her feel seen, valued for who she was, not for what she could offer or how much money she had. Slowly, she realized that David had begun to admire her more than just as a hawker. There was something deeper in his eyes whenever he looked at her, a kind of respect that she had never felt from anyone before. One day, David invited Jane out for dinner, wanting to get to know her better outside of the market. Jane was hesitant at first. She was used to a life of simplicity and didn't want to appear out of place. But after some persuasion, she agreed. That evening, they talked about their dreams, their pasts, and their futures. Jane told David about the struggles she faced and how she believed in the power of hard work. David listened intently, genuinely fascinated by her strength and determination. Before the night ended, David surprised her with an offer she never expected. "Jane," he said with a smile, "I've never met anyone like you. You deserve so much more than what you have now. Let me help you build the future you've always dreamed of." That was the beginning of something new, a new life, full of hope and promise for Jane. She had no idea that the love and respect David showed her would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. As Jane and David's relationship blossomed, her friends couldn't help but notice the changes in her life. At first, they were curious, but soon their curiosity turned into envy. Jane, who had always struggled to make ends meet, was now walking alongside a wealthy businessman. She had moved into a beautiful house, and her life seemed to be filled with luxury that was once beyond her reach. Her friends, who had always taken the easy path to success, were upset. They had always believed that Jane was naive for working so hard without looking for shortcuts. Yet now she seemed to have everything they wanted. It didn't feel fair to them. They began to whisper behind her back, questioning how she had managed to find such a man. She must have done something to catch his eye. They would say, "She's not even that special. What does he see in her?" Their jealousy grew stronger each day, and they couldn't understand why Jane deserved this happiness when they, who had tried everything to land a wealthy man, still struggled. One day, when they gathered at a cafe, one of Jane's so-called friends, Beatrice, suggested something that would change everything. "We can't let her have it all," Beatrice whispered. "Let's make sure she understands that everything she has now comes at a price." Under the guise of celebrating Jane's marriage to David, they decided to give the couple a gift, a beautiful, ornate box wrapped in shiny red ribbons. The gift looked innocent enough, but it was far from that. It was a curse. Jane's friends had used their envy to bring misfortune upon her life. The box contained a powerful curse that, when given, would begin a slow unraveling of the happiness that Jane had fought so hard to build. It was their way of getting revenge, ensuring that Jane would fall just as they had fallen many times before, stuck in the same cycle of struggle they believed she deserved. The moment Jane received the gift from her friends, she felt a strange sense of unease. Her friends' smiles seemed a little too wide, their words a little too sweet. But in her joy, she dismissed it, thinking it was just her imagination. Little did she know, this gift would soon destroy everything she and David had built together. The curse had been set in motion, and their world was about to come crashing down. At first, everything seemed fine. Jane and David settled into their new life, surrounded by comfort and love. But slowly, things began to change. It started with Jane's health. She felt unusually tired, her body constantly aching, even though she had been taking care of herself. Then one day, she suffered a miscarriage. It was a devastating blow, one that left her feeling heartbroken and confused. She and David had been so excited to start a family, but this loss felt like a heavy weight on her chest. She tried to remain strong for David, but the grief was hard to hide. Weeks passed, and just when Jane thought she was recovering, it happened again. Another miscarriage, and then another. It seemed like an endless cycle of pain. Jane couldn't understand it. Why was this happening to her? She had always believed that hard work and perseverance would lead to success and happiness, but now, all of her dreams seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Her once thriving business, which she had started with David, also began to crumble. Orders fell through, clients pulled out, and soon, David's wealth started to dwindle. Their home, once filled with laughter and love, now echoed with silence and worry. David, overwhelmed by the constant misfortunes, grew frustrated. He began to blame Jane, accusing her of bringing bad luck into their lives. "Maybe we're just not meant to be happy," he said one evening, his voice thick with frustration. "You can't even carry a child. What kind of woman are you?" Jane was crushed by his words, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't understand why things were going so wrong. Every time she tried to explain that it wasn't her fault, David only became angrier. Finally, in a fit of rage, David drove Jane out of their home. "I don't want you here anymore," he shouted, his face twisted with anger. "Go back to the streets where you came from. Maybe then, things will get." Heartbroken and defeated, Jane walked away, her tears hidden behind a forced smile. She was alone, with nothing but the weight of the curse and the pain of her broken marriage on her shoulders. With nowhere else to go, Jane found herself back on the streets where she had started. The life she had worked so hard to escape, the one filled with long hours under the hot sun, selling fruit just to survive, had come rushing back to her. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion of the work, it was the emotional toll that weighed heavily on her. Every step she took felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. Her home, her love, and her dreams. She had been driven away by the one person she thought would stand by her, no matter what. But now, she was alone. As Jane hawked her fruits by the roadside, she couldn't help but remember the life she had shared with David. The joy of their early days together, their plans for the future, the way he had looked at her with such admiration. Now all of that seemed like a distant memory. She couldn't understand what had gone wrong. Why was she being punished? Her heart ached with every passing customer who ignored her and every passerby who stared at her with pity. The life she had known was gone, and she was left with nothing but the heavy burden of rejection. Meanwhile, David's life was unraveling as well. His business, once a symbol of success, was now sinking deeper into debt. He was overwhelmed with guilt and confusion, unsure of what had caused the downfall. Desperate for answers, he turned to a pastor, hoping that someone could shed light on what was happening. The pastor listened carefully to David's story, nodding as he spoke. When David finished, the pastor finally spoke, his voice calm yet firm. What you are experiencing is not the result of anything you've done. It is a curse placed upon you and your wife through a gift you received. David's eyes widened in disbelief. A curse? He asked, his voice filled with doubt. The pastor nodded. Yes, a curse placed by those who envy you, who cannot stand to see your happiness. They wanted to destroy what you have, and they've succeeded. David's heart sank as the truth of the pastor's words settled in. He had blamed Jane for their troubles, but now he understood the real source of their pain. And he realized, with a jolt of fear, that if he didn't act quickly, it might be too late for Jane. David's heart raced as the weight of the pastor's words sank in. The curse had caused all the misfortunes that had torn his life apart, and the one person who could lift it, Jane, was the very person he had cast aside. He felt a deep sense of shame, a gnawing guilt that wouldn't let him rest. How could he have blamed her for something beyond her control? He had let his anger blind him, driven by frustration instead of understanding. He had hurt the one person who had always stood by him, and now it seemed like all was lost. The pastor had warned David that the curse was not only affecting their lives, but was also endangering Jane's life. If he didn't reconcile with her soon, the consequences could be fatal. Desperate to make things right, David set out to find Jane. He retraced his steps, going to the places where he knew she used to sell fruit. He searched the streets, asking everyone he met if they had seen her. Hours turned into days, and the weight of his guilt grew heavier with every passing moment. He couldn't understand how he had let things get so bad, but he knew one thing. He had to find Jane. He couldn't live with the thought of losing her forever. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, David spotted Jane at the side of the road. She was hawking her fruit just like before, but this time she looked different. Her shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, her eyes weary from the struggles she had faced. She didn't look up as he approached, as if she had already given up on the idea of ever seeing him again. But David couldn't let her slip away. He walked up to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Jane?" he called softly, his voice trembling. She turned to face him, her expression cold and distant. "What do you want, David?" she asked, her voice flat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The pain of the past few weeks hung heavy between them, but David couldn't stay silent any longer. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I blamed you for something you had no control over. It wasn't you, Jane. It was the curse. Please, forgive me." Tears welled up in Jane's eyes as she looked at him. The weight of his apology was like a balm to her broken heart. She had never stopped loving him, but the pain of his rejection had been unbearable. Slowly, she nodded. "I've been waiting for you, David. I've been waiting for you to realize that it wasn't me." Together, they stood there, not saying anything more. The curse still loomed over them, but now, with their hearts finally reconciled, they had a chance to break it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, they had hope again. With Jane's forgiveness, David felt a spark of hope reignite within him. He had come so close to losing everything, and now he was determined to fix what he had broken. The curse, which had cast a shadow over their lives, still lingered in the background, but they knew the first step in lifting it was their reconciliation. David took Jane's hand in his, and for the first time in weeks, they shared a quiet moment of peace. But they both knew that their journey wasn't over yet. They had to destroy the cursed gift that had caused all their pain. That night, they sat down together in their home, a place that had once felt like a sanctuary, but now felt empty and cold. Jane had kept the gift, the ornate box wrapped in shiny red ribbons, tucked away in a drawer. She had never fully trusted it, but she had held on to it, not knowing that it was the source of their misery. Now, with David by her side, she knew it had to go. Together, they opened the box. Inside, they found a small, intricate figurine, a symbol of envy and malice. It seemed innocent at first glance, but they both felt an unmistakable chill in the air as soon as they touched it. David looked at Jane, his face filled with determination. "We have to destroy it, Jane. This is the only way to end this curse." Jane nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. They knew that if they didn't act quickly, the curse could claim even more of their lives. With trembling hands, they took the figurine outside. Under the dark sky, David found a large rock and without hesitation smashed the figurine to pieces. As the pieces hit the ground, an eerie silence fell over them. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. But then, as if by magic, a warm breeze swept through the air, and they both felt a weight lift from their hearts. The curse had been broken. The next few days were a whirlwind of change. Jane discovered she was pregnant once more, and this time, her body was strong, the fear of losing another child fading with each passing day. David's business slowly began to recover, as if the misfortunes had never occurred. Orders picked up, clients returned, and the once empty office was filled with life again. The joy and hope that had been absent from their lives returned, and for the first time in months, they felt like a family again. But even as their fortunes restored, Jane and David couldn't forget what they had been through. They knew the road ahead would not always be easy, but they were ready to face it together, their hearts united by the lessons they had learned. They had overcome the darkness, and now nothing could tear them apart. However, not everyone would be so fortunate. As their lives returned to normal, Jane's former friends, those who had placed the curse on her, began to unravel in ways they never expected. The envy they had harbored had come back to haunt them, and the consequences of their wicked actions were now inevitable. Their lives, once filled with pride and superiority, began to crumble, one piece at a time. Madness slowly overtook them, a fitting end for those who had tried to destroy the happiness of others. And as Jane and David moved forward, stronger and wiser than before, they knew that justice had been served. As Jane and David's lives returned to normal, the peace they had longed for began to settle in. Their days were filled with joy as they eagerly awaited the arrival of their child, and David's business, now thriving, allowed them to rebuild what had been lost. The weight of the past seemed to lift with every new day. But for Jane, there remained a quiet sadness, an understanding that the people she had once called friends had been the ones who had set her life on its painful course. She had forgiven them, but the bitterness of their betrayal still lingered in her heart. What hurt most was that they had done it all out of jealousy and greed, unable to see the value in hard work and honesty. And as for Jane's former friends, their tragic end was a reminder that envy and greed only lead to destruction. They had lost everything, their beauty, their wealth, their sanity, because they had failed to see the power of kindness, hard work, and forgiveness. They had chosen a dark path, and now, that path had led them to madness and ruin. It was a bitter lesson for them, but for Jane and David, it was a victory of love, perseverance, and the truth that justice would always prevail in the end. Please like and subscribe for more enchanting stories like this. Bye. See you on my next video.